Welcome to Herself, a space for women to have deep conversations about the intersection between spiritual entrepreneurship and fulfilling your potential, so you can become the woman you truly are in every area of your life. After being in business for over 2 decades, I've learned, as you likely have too, that as you grow your business grows you in unexpected, often challenging, yet miraculous ways. Here, we'll talk about how to get out of your own way so you can grow a business that's abundant and sustainable while allowing you to be a force for good in the world. I'll give you simple, actionable strategies as well as wisdom and inspiration to help you root into your wholeness, lead from your values, and work in ways that feel deeply aligned so you can bring your true self into the world through your business and in every area of your life. Hey there, beautiful. This August, I am stepping away from the mic to honor 2 major life transitions: getting married and moving to France. Yes, it is a season of deep change, and I am choosing to savor it fully. But even as I step back, I still want to show up for you in a meaningful way. So this summer, I'm bringing you a curated series of powerful conversations with some of the most respected voices in the internal family systems, or IFS, community. And these episodes explore what it really means to do our inner work, not by fixing or forcing ourselves, but by meeting every part of us with compassion and curiosity. This work has transformed not only my own healing, but also the way that I support my clients. And I know it will speak to you too. So whether you're hearing these episodes for the first time or revisiting them with fresh ears and a fuller heart, may they be a mirror, an anchor, a reminder of your own inner wisdom. I will be back with brand new episodes in September, broadcasting from my new home in France. Until then, may this season bring you clarity and deep nourishment. And now, here's this week's conversation. You've invested in yourself, done the therapy, taken the certification trainings, been on the retreats. You've bought the marketing courses, hired the coaches. Heck, you've even visited the Akashic records. Yes, you have done everything right. And yet, you still feel like you're walking 2 separate paths. One leads to your truth, the other leads to success. But they have never felt like the same road. You have one foot on the gas, one foot on the brake, and you're tired of pretending that's not a problem. What if now is your time to stop choosing between your soul and your strategy, between your healing and your ambition? What if this is the year you become the self-led steward of a business that reflects all of you? Welcome to Herself CEO, a conscious business immersion and internal family systems circle for spiritual women ready to lead from within. This isn't just about building a business for the sake of it. It's about building a business that feels like home, one that's sustainable, profitable, and sacred, one that honors your nervous system, your cycles, your soul. Inside this container, you'll learn to lead your business from your wholeness, not your wounds. Clarify your offerings, your message, and your mission. Create consistent, soul-aligned revenue without self-abandonment. And root your visibility, systems, and strategy in your values, not a fleeting trend. This is the only program like this that exists. The only internal family systems and feminine spirituality-based business program of its kind for coaches, therapists, creatives, healers who are here to change the world and stay well while doing it. We open for early enrollment in July, and our journey officially begins in the fall. You are not behind. You are not too sensitive. You are not too late. You are right on time. And this circle is being prepared for you. You can join the waitlist now to be the first to know when doors open for early registration this July. Head to sarahavonstover.com/CEO. That's sarahavonstover.com/CEO. sarahavonstover.com/CEO. Because your business isn't just a business. It's a living vessel for your soul's work. And it's time to lead from your true self.
Hi, I'm Sarah Yvonne Stover, host of Truth, Love, and Beauty. I'm an author, internal family systems practitioner, and teacher of women's yoga, meditation, and spirituality, who's built a long career since the early 2000s to be exact, in supporting women to cultivate greater psycho-spiritual wholeness and, in turn, to come home to themselves. My dedication to women and to the upliftment of the feminine at large has been a lifelong one. From growing up as the second oldest of 4 sisters in a Connecticut suburb of New York City, to studying at an Ivy League all-women's college, all the way up to today. And the very things I support women with mirror the struggles that I've had, things like doubting, pushing, perfecting, hating, and yes, at times, even hurting myself. Yet I've found, and I have a sense that because you're here, you have too, that these very wounds and pain points can become openings for profound healing, growth, and spiritual insight. I created this podcast in service of honoring just this sacred healing journey that we women are on. It was born out of my own desire to hear Dharma talks, which are what the Buddhist tradition calls wisdom teachings, through the distinct lens and voice of the sacred feminine. Here, I'll share these very talks, along with rich conversations with leading thinkers and luminaries about all facets of the feminine spiritual journey. Plus, this podcast highlights 3 of the core values we must embrace on the feminine path: truth, love, and beauty. Values which we all need more of during this tumultuous time in history. I'm so happy you're here. Let's dive in. Hello, friends. Today, I'm sharing on the podcast for us to delve more deeply into internal family systems, or IFS, which, as many of you know, has become a core part of my work over the past couple of years and a core part of my own healing journey for about the past decade. So if you're not sure what IFS is, stay tuned. You will learn more about it in today's conversation. And our particular focus today, I know, will be of interest to pretty much everyone, regardless of whether or not you know about IFS, because we are exploring a few states of being that I know can play big roles in all of our lives in varying degrees. And these states of being include shame, anxiety, and depression. So these are big ones. I've certainly struggled with all of these at times, and the way that IFS approaches them just feels so relevant and helpful. To lead us into this conversation, I'm inviting a lead trainer from the IFS community, and I've enjoyed assisting her training at one of her trainings last year, and we're inviting Rina Dubin. So Rina is an IFS solo lead trainer and a licensed psychologist practicing in Newton, Massachusetts. She provides psychotherapy to individuals and couples and offers consultation for individuals, dyads, and small groups. She also offers workshops to larger groups on various topics, which always include an experiential focus. IFS has been foundational for Rina since her immersion in 2004, and she's found it to be the deepest and most profound approach for healing and expansion, and highly values how this work is an approach to living and not just a model. So more recently, a focus of Rina's work has been to expand not only how up-close systems like our families and our schools impact our parts, but also how the larger systems through which we all navigate impact our parts and our different identities. This feels much more complete and ties to her legacy heirloom of make the world better. Our conversation offers an overview of IFS, an explanation of the things that we both value, Rina and I both value about this approach to healing and living, a discussion about leadership, and a deeper dive into shame, anxiety, and depression through an IFS lens, a guided experiential so that you can get to know your inner world more intimately, and more. So I hope you enjoy this conversation with Rina Dubin. Okay, welcome, Rina.
Good to see you.
Good to see you too. It's good to have you. And we always start our conversations here with both a personal and a parts check-in. So if you're open to it, I'd love for you to share with us where you're joining us in the world and just any parts that you want to name that you're bringing into the space with you today.
Sure. So I'm outside of Boston, just west of Boston and Newton, and I'm looking forward to this. I'm a little bit anxious, like, oh, where's it going to go, and is it going to be useful, all that, but what I'm aware of, and also nice to see you.
Yeah, likewise. So most listeners will be familiar with IFS or internal family systems. However, there'll likely be some who are not familiar. And so I'm wondering if you could describe what IFS is to someone who's never heard of it before and who's just encountering it here with us today for the first time.
Yeah, it's not an easy elevator speech, is it?
It's not.
Yeah, so I've been a therapist for a long time, and this has just been a great opening for, I think, a deeper level of healing because it doesn't pathologize the behaviors that we get into that are often coping strategies to manage something. And those behaviors often can upset other parts of either our systems or other people because, we're all trying to manage the challenges that come to us, and certainly little ones don't do it with a whole brain on board and are just trying to find out what do I need to do to get my needs met. But those strategies become, sort of entrenched and automatic. And so often when we have more resources on board, we're still using those strategies because we're not that aware of it. So this is a way of getting to know more what's happening in our system and what's being done to try to help us both get our needs met and also to keep things safe that need to be safe. So it's a very respectful and collaborative model, and really it becomes a way, I actually don't like the word model, it really becomes a way of living because we begin to get more familiar with what's the reactions we're having and beginning to get curious about them because it means something's gotten tweaked inside.
Yeah, I definitely agree. It's a way of living. And I guess we'll talk more about how that is as we go. But I just wanted to name that I first met you at the end of 2021. I was assisting a level 1 training that you led. So now you're leading IFS trainings, and I'm wondering if you could share with us what your journey with IFS has been like. Like, how did you first learn about it? And then thinking that you were a therapist before you discovered it, and what has led you to become, so kind of move up to be a trainer now?
Yeah, those are good questions. So living in Boston, which is an area that often overtrains, everybody, whatever, that's just the way it is. So I had become trained in EMDR in the late 90s and I liked EMDR and I respect it, but I never fell in love with it. But because of being in that community, there were a lot of therapies that kind of, this is my view, became what I call the 21st century trainings because much more was known about the brain and more was known about mindfulness and mind body, all of that was sort of percolating. And I think some of the impact of the women's movement in terms of relationship. So to me, the field made huge spurts into these models that really began to take hold in the late 90s and beginning of the 21st century. So I have some friends. So the Cape Cod does an institute every year that different people come and speak about all kinds of things. And Dick Schwartz, who created IFS or had IFS pass through him, depending on how it gets defined, leads a week there every summer. And some women I knew, one in particular was saying, I'm going to rent a house on the Cape and people can buy shares. And so that was my first introduction to IFS. And I'd seen a workshop before that Mike Elkin did. We had a local trauma dissociation community, but I couldn't quite get what it was, actually. So I went to this week, which the Cape Cod Institute is nice in that it has you in school in the morning and then often playing in the afternoon, and you're on the Cape. And we kind of fell in love with the work and with each other. And I did it partly feeling like I'm going to do this so I don't have to do level 1. And actually, as the women were getting to know each other, we all had an exit strategy because, I didn't live that far away. I could go home if I wanted to. And of course, nobody did. And so it turned out, although I was intrigued, I certainly didn't have the model. And then the following summer, Dick was doing a week at Kripalu, which is a yoga retreat center in Western Mass. And a few of us went, and it was, oh, I'm going to do that, and then I'll get the model. And it was after that I jumped into a level one. And at that point, level ones were 6 3-day weekends and over generally, 10 months or a year. And I would find myself starting to get it and then sliding out of it. So then when the training ended, it was, what am I going to do now? So I decided to become a program assistant, who are really sort of the front engines, as you know, of the training. And I kept doing it because I was growing, and that eventually led me to be considered for becoming an assistant trainer. And it kind of went on for there. I had lots of parts who did not see me out front. So that was another whole journey. Yeah.
You are such a natural leader and teacher of it.
Well, thank you. But my parts didn't quite see that, although I come from teachers. So it did start to make sense over time that I was coming back to something that was sort of foundational in me, as well as, this isn't true for everybody in IFS, but I feel like these are wonderful skills to be bringing out into the world around how to deal with polarized situations and have openness to different points of view and all of that. And I come from a family that does have a fair amount of activism in it. So it began eventually to catch on, oh, this is also my way of, doing good in the world. So it's, it's become a huge part of my life as a result. And balance is not a key word. So
yes. Yeah, that's great to draw that parallel with activism and your family roots, and just how you're spending most of your time and energy now. What initially led you to want to become a therapist in the first place?
I always thought I would be a teacher. My father was my better and worst parent, and he'd come first from being a teacher, and then moved into special ed, and eventually became a psychologist. And I thought I'd be a teacher, and then it's somewhere along the way that shifted, fairly like in college or right after that. I wanted to go into this field. So, and now I've come back to teacher. So,
Right.
There's always
nice combination.
Yeah, there's always some teaching. I think therapy in general has some roots in medical model, and some roots in education, and some in spiritual. There are many other doorways in, but teacher certainly one of them. So
let's talk about that teaching and leadership role that you're in now. And like I said, I really valued the leadership that you modeled and that you brought to the training that I assisted with you. I valued it on a number of levels. And I think it's rare to experience that kind of leadership. And what I experienced from you was I'm not sure how to say this in a way that's going to make sense, but it was like self-leadership, but not as a concept, but as it is expressed through you. And there was what you're talking about, like listening and holding space for all different kinds of perspectives, all different kinds of parts, both within the students and the assistants. And it seemed also within yourself. And I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about how you approach leadership when you step into those trainings and hold space for not only the students, but also the staff.
Yeah, well, I don't know that I thought about it in an organized way. I've tended to watch how people teach not always in a deliberate way. I had a point in college when I was choosing classes by who I thought was interesting to learn from more than what the content was. And in the IFS world, I haven't had trainers that I didn't think had some skills and all of that, but I've had some that I liked how they brought leadership, and some that I didn't. And which would mainly mean not having as much awareness of impact, not being open to feedback, those kinds of things. Or so I learned from watching, and I've had some very strong mentors along the way. I think the strongest one has been Ann Cinco, but there have been certainly, I did a lot of work, a lot of retreats with Dick, and I don't see Dick so much as a teacher, but he embodies the work, and he knows how to bring people into it. And that's a whole other bunch of skills. So some combination of all of that. And I'd mentioned Mike wasn't a formal mentor but he brings a lot. And so I spent many years with him as well. So I've just had some strong models, I would say, in different ways. And then I think about it also through the lens around identity. And I value a lot of what I see as, I suppose, female centered. I'm told, and I think it's true, I have some male energy as well. I think my father has 2 daughters, and I think he actually wanted a son, and maybe in certain ways I am, I don't know. But so it's something about being able to take responsibility and be the bottom line at the same time as being present and attuned and hearing.
Yeah, I think some level of masculine energy, or whatever you want to call it, if it's young energy or masculine energy, but it is needed in leadership, and coupled with that feminine energy, like you're talking about. And yeah, you're naming just modeling leadership and being open to hearing impact from people, being open to receive feedback. I think that was one of the things that really touched me the most. And just to have a model doing that, because I haven't had that with anyone that I've studied with before. And I've started to bring that more into my own teaching. And it's been really powerful, both for me and for the women that I'm working with. So you name that. It's mostly been things that you've seen other people modeling that you have been inspired by. Are there other things in particular that you've observed over the years that you have wanted to bring into your own leadership?
Well, so, it became increasingly apparent that IFS was, as many organizations have been, very white-centered, not only in terms of who was in leadership, but in terms of the ways things were taught and the assumptions that were made, what was embedded in it. Not that I think that's IFS, but that was its translation often. And then as there's been a more good noise being made around, or good trouble, as John Lewis would call it, more noise being made around what isn't working or where is implicit bias and all of that, the trainings got more bumpy because we really weren't in any formal way prepared for all of that. And I was out of step in that way as well. I think for me, what I came to after getting sort of shaken up in different ways was it did bring me back to things that were in some ways with me because of how I'd grown up. It doesn't mean I don't think I had nearly enough awareness of my whiteness and my privilege and all of that, but I had been grown up with a lot of systemic understanding about how, the kind of role class plays, and what that means by class also extends to race often, and the women's movement and all of that. So that piece about, how do we stay open and also create more engagement in different ways. And what I found is if I can do that well, the kind of collaboration that happens makes things much richer and much safer for the participants as well. So, which doesn't mean it's perfect, and it doesn't mean everybody has the ideal experience that I'd want them to have, but it means we get closer to it. Yeah. So that's been a real recent push, in the last few years.
Yeah, and that was something that you modeled really well in that training too. And also something about, I want to speak to, when I wasn't originally planning on talking about this, but it's coming up right now as we're here together, just the power of doing IFS in a group.
Yeah, true.
And what's possible in that. And I'm wondering if you can speak to, the IFS is very powerful one-on-one. And it's also incredibly powerful when we do it in community as a group with other people. Can you speak to what you notice about the similarities and the differences of that?
I don't know if I'll be speaking to exactly that, but you can always ask another question.
Okay.
But what I think is true for most of us is a lot of the ways we get hurt are certainly in relationship, but it's also in groups, whether it's family or classrooms or schoolyards or, how we're received in our communities, even before we get to identity stuff. And so to your point, when that can be worked on or or something gets created where there's a possibility for a different way to be in a group or a different way to work through woundings or ruptures, that is a huge power. You're right. That I don't want to say transcends because it's different for different people, but has that possibility. And, from the work, and as I'm aware, as you're saying, some people won't have IFS on board, but part of what happens in the work is what's called an unburdening process, meaning as things get healed, the process for being able to let go of things that no longer have to be carried. And there's been actually some movement toward group unburdenings. Whether it's around racism or about patriarchy or about things that have been constraining us. Then there are all kinds of things that can be constraints. So that is powerful. That is powerful in a group.
Yeah.
And anybody who's ever been to a big rock concert or something like that has a sense of, in a different way, of that kind of power about being part of something much bigger than we are. Maybe certain religious practices too, right?
Yeah. And also just that trust that the community is held in a certain way. And the orientation in IFS is to hold self energy, or for those who aren't familiar with IFS, self energy is like just resting in your highest self or your core self, your essential self. And not, even if you have judgmental parts or parts that disagree with someone else's saying, your primary orientation is to come back to that self. And that creates just a feeling of a lot of safety and permission that it's okay to bring whatever, to speak for any parts that are here. And that's very uncommon. There's not many communities where really all parts of us are welcomed. And for me, that's been really healing. And also just being an assistant in your training, in our staff meetings, just being able to speak for any part that was coming up for me, and having that be okay, having that be heard and acknowledged.
Yeah, and I also want to add, though, I don't remember our staff all together, but I know we were mostly or all white, and were one of us not, or two of us, or whatever, then we would have had less of that experience, right? So there's the challenge about not only having broader identities on staff, but it isn't just the number of bodies, it's also the, really, really having some way to bring in what are the riches of these other places of navigating in the world. So you would have had an easier time, ideally, not ideally meaning ideal for everybody, or likely you had an easier time because the staff you were coming into was a little more like who you are. And it can become that much more challenging if non-binary, or I'm trans, or I'm Black, or I'm, any number of other identities that haven't had the same kind of seats at the table.
And still, even with that, it's like just what it's all held with still gives us all a baseline to relate to each other from.
It is. And how we help, like, if that can get delivered in a way that feels real and trusted, which also means it has to be tested. And I don't mean in a deliberate way, but, a bump has to happen.
Right.
In a way that I actually do feel you listen. I'm a participant, or I'm on staff for the first time, that you and others were making some room to listen. And if somebody wasn't, that we could bring some curiosity to that and see what was blocking. Then there starts to be more buy-in.
Yeah.
And there's been a lot of change in the organization, just to say that, so that who's coming up into trainings is becoming much, much broader than it was. And many more people of color, many more people in different intersections of identity and all of that. And it's, it makes it more complicated, but it makes it more real.
For sure. Yes. And I know that I see you leading a level 2 training coming up this summer, and it's on shame, anxiety, and depression through an IFS lens. And I'm wondering if we can just take some time to speak about these things from the IFS perspective, because they are such parts of being a human being. And I know women who are listening are really going to resonate with these things, that want to hear more about them. So how about we start with anxiety? And can you speak to anxiety a bit from an IFS perspective?
Yeah, and first I want to say I'm co-leading with Tamala Floyd, who's our first Black trainer, which and is also, quite a solid and it just brings a lot of resources. So I'm really looking forward to. I know her a little bit, but I'm really looking forward to sharing that. So words like anxiety, in particular, maybe depression and shame, yeah, probably too, can either be signs of some things that are vulnerable in us, but it also can be signs of that they're playing a protective function. So, for example, anxiety, if we get to know it, could say, well, if I keep you anxious, you won't get out there and do things that'll get you hurt. Right. So some of what we're learning in IFS is what function are these things playing? Because we're learning about how things get enrolled as a way of, there's more work also that's been done on this polyvagal theory and this nerve that scans for safety, which is a main function of our nervous system, is to scan for safety. So anxiety can be a protector that's saying, nope, don't do that. I'm going to keep you, I won't let you sleep, or I'll keep you too anxious to get out and speak in front of people, or, something like that, right? So it has a protective function. Or it may be connected to fear. I think fear in some ways is a less clinical word, to fear that's being carried because of things that have happened and haven't healed. We could call it wounds or trauma or some PTSD that hasn't healed. And so then the nervous system is set around all of that.
And so when someone experiences a lot of anxiety or a lot of fear, what what are the first steps for working with that?
Well, first, we are also holding, as you know, that whatever those things are in all of us, because we can get defined as that anxious person rather than it's not all of who somebody is. It's something that is traveling in their system. And sometimes even hearing that helps people to feel more seen or less labeled or pathologized, right? So if somebody's coming in with that, we're really just interested in getting to know that aspect of someone and what role it's playing. And then depending on whether it's playing a protective function or it's actually some fear that's being carried, we go, then they would be down two different paths. One path would be, if it's protective, getting to know how it learned this and what its worries were. And then either making an agreement to heal who it's protecting or to help it know there are other resources on board, because also often these parts get stuck in time. They're younger and they really aren't in that way in fuller awareness of who the person is. And that can sound like it's an easy process, and sometimes it is, but often it's a piece of work.
Yeah. And how about depression?
Well, even before I had IFS under my belt, I'm always curious about these catch-all words. I think because I have some parts where don't want to be run by medical model in this field, meaning sick well and that kind of thing. So I would always ask people, what do you mean by depression? And sometimes would hear, can't get out of bed and no pleasure in life and all of that. And sometimes I'd hear things that sounded like grief. Or sometimes it might have been, there was a lot of anger that was kind of shut down. So this is that process of beginning to know, first of all, what's meant. And then there are different ways, I think, to, again, see what function it's playing. Is it again, am I carrying other people's? We carry energy that comes from how we carry certainly energy from our direct experience, but also from some legacy things that have happened, families who've had a lot of loss or a lot of persecution. And so the more we know about what's driving it, the more we can begin to direct attention to how to begin to be with and free up. Often depression can be, I think, parts who've been too alone and had to navigate too much. And when we do that, when it starts that way, it often leaves a feeling of overwhelm, or there's no one here to help me, I'm on my own. And so we develop some core beliefs really about how we see ourselves. I can't expect help. And then we can see how that could lead to somebody having some pretty heavy energy, right?
And then just the third piece of this, shame.
Well, shame is a pretty profound one because I think we all carry little bits or lots of it. And my sense is shame is almost always a relational experience. Children, one thing about watching little children play, if they're at all in a reasonable environment, is they don't make a lot of judgment about their drawing or their sandcastle. And so if it falls down, they can laugh but it doesn't take too long before, as we're getting socialized and we're in groups, to your point, where we can start comparing or being told that wasn't good enough in some way, so we're starting to take on beliefs that often we think mean something about us. And so shame again can be a protector, because if we have shame, we often have an internal shamer. We'll hear inside, that was stupid. What's wrong with you? Why did you do that? And of course, often if we have that, we probably had some version of that being said to us, or a certain kind of neglect that we read that way about, I'm not worth it. And so again, likewise, shame can be a protector, and it also can be just a sign of unworthiness and all of that. And so, as I mentioned, Mike Elkin, he would say his definition, I think he would say where he got it from too, but it's the unbearable feeling of our badness being witnessed by others. We believe that, and then other people are seeing that. And I think one of the archetypes of that is that middle school age where we see a group of girls talking and assume they're talking about me, and maybe they are. And there's a lot of that urge to fit in and all of that, right? So what a painful experience that can be. And again, goes back to your point about groups and left out, right? Belonging.
Is there a short meditation that you could lead us through, a purse meditation, to help us connect with one of these, either shame within us or aspects of depression or anxiety?
Well, I'm not sure why you'd want people to do that. Tell me a little more.
Just some sort of an exercise just to help listeners start to connect with their own purse, just to get a sense of taking what we're saying and relating it to their own inner experience.
Well, I can think, we did this because one of the things we teach in level 1 is how to work with polarization. So I could ask people to take a moment, and I have us slow down a little bit if that felt okay. And just maybe to begin to focus on breath and body, and maybe to have something nearby if it's wanted to write with. And I would ask us maybe to think for a moment about something we don't like about ourselves. Is there something we don't like in our bodies, about how we look? So just in noticing that, we probably can notice we have different reactions to that. We may have parts who don't like that we have those feelings. If there's something we don't like, I don't like my parts who keep me up late at night. There's a me who keeps me up late at night, and there's a me who doesn't like it. So we're beginning to have a sense of some of the conversations that we hear inside. And maybe just taking some time for those who this is a new experience, or bringing in awareness, something that's sort of been there in that way that, that's just sort of underground. And if it feels right, people can begin to make a map. which is another way of kind of learning more about who we are. So I'm not sure this is quite going where you hoped, Sarah. So I want to check in with you, but I think it's a way of beginning to get a sense that our brains are meaning making, and we're having these internal judgments or notices or tightnesses that are different ways our systems are expressing.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful and really practical, really relatable.
Okay.
So we're all having those inner conversations and we're not always aware of that it's just different parts or different aspects of us.
Yeah. So maybe just giving some time, especially for those who this is newer, to just, maybe hold what this was like. And are, if they had a chance to do more with it, what would that be like? If something came up that was unexpected, it'd be okay to let you know or something like that. But again, it's a beginning to walk in to what's going on anyway inside. But just again, it's like it starts to come up into awareness a little bit more.
And Rina, are there certain practices or ways that you connect with your parts regularly?
Yeah, I don't know that I have a regular practice except that, sitting in my seat when I'm doing this work with others and then being in trainings, there's just constant, if we're paying attention, there's constant stuff we notice. Like I notice when something feels unfinished, or I had an interaction that left me activated in some way. I didn't feel understood, or I don't like the way something was done, and I'm having reactions to it. So there's opportunities all the time in that. Get me involved with customer service, and you'll see a whole bunch of
Where
right. It. So I do have some ongoing notice because it's what I do so much of the time. And if anything, sometimes it's good for me to have a kickback, where I can sort of turn that off a little bit. And mostly I like it. So I just find that interesting about myself and about others. So I think it's a noticing in that way. I'm not someone who's generally sitting for a while and meditating, except in a training, because we often do that as a way of helping people arrive or digest something. Making space is a really useful thing, and our culture doesn't allow a lot of that. And I think being an older person, what I notice is what's happening with attention spans as we're all on our devices and everything's fast, right? Even just slowing down feels, somehow like a revolutionary thing to do sometimes.
the biggest questions I get from my students and clients is they're wondering the best way for them to connect with their parts in between meetings or just ongoingly. And I know how I answer this, but I'm curious how you would answer that to people.
Well, I think again, it varies a lot because some of us are very visual and some of us are much more kinesthetic. So I would want to learn what works for people. And I also think for some people, because of that, again, growing up too alone or not feeling connected enough, sometimes it doesn't come easily for people until we're in connection. And so I would want to learn more about people's experience of connecting with things outside versus it doesn't go very well for me. It happens more when I'm with you.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's similar to what I share, is just finding the right path for each person because it can be so different.
Yeah. And then how people resource is different. I mean, there's some who are very connected to nature. So, being quiet in the woods might feel really spacious, but for somebody else that might feel scary or not inviting. right? So, but somebody may be cooking and having that experience, or singing, or in connection, having some tea with somebody. So I would just try to learn more about what, I guess these are things about how do we settle, or how do we digest, or how do we come back into some alignment, and what happens alone, what happens in relationship. Yeah.
And Rina, what is your current growing edge?
Oh, there probably is more than one.
Or edges? Whatever you feel called to share.
Yeah, I mean, I still think there's some activation of my nervous system that can happen fairly easily around. So I did come to realize some time back that yeah, I've had a concern around losing people, and especially what feels like rupture. And at one point, my therapist said, do you think some of that is legacy burden? And I realized I have 4 immigrant grandparents. So it was sort of like, oh, wait a minute, this isn't all mine. So that was already freeing just to know that, but I also do carry some that I think come from my own learned insecurities, not fitting in or not being good enough and all of that. So that still needs some work and needs some love and some healing. And then, I think being kinder to myself. It's easier often with others. My critics are much less harsh than they used to be. I mean, that's something most of us, when you ask about parts, most of us can relate to having an inner critic, right? It could be a shamer, but it could just be a perfectionist or a standard bearer, right? So I think those, well, it's not, I think those have softened a lot. And then I think a growing edge also is around what's the right balance as I'm moving into being older. I'm aware of that, actually. Some about more vulnerability, or more, sense that there's less quality time, maybe. So those are some growing edges, I think, too.
And are there certain things on the horizon that you feel like excited about, or that you're building towards?
Well, most of it's in the IFS world. Well, I would feel excited about some travel when I can figure that out better, because, I think the world is somewhat more opened up than it was. And that kind of adventure would be fun. So there's that. I don't quite have a frame for that yet. And then I'm going to be playing more of a role in some of the PA development stuff, and doing some the program assistants, some help in preparing them, because that preparation is really by the seat of your pants. And again, it's such a crucial role. So that's going to be starting up. And I think the rest is just sort of, honing things more. How can I deliver it better? How can I add more into that piece of work? I'm moving from doing less clinical work and more consultation and training, and so that's already in process, and that feels good and right.
And at the beginning of this conversation, you talked about how IFS is not just a model, it's really a way of life. And for those who are listening, whether they're familiar with IFS or this is the first time they've heard about it, what can you say about bringing some of this forward from our conversation just as a way of life?
Well, what I can say for me and encourage in others is to get curious when we're having strong reactions, not because they're bad or we shouldn't have them, but because usually it means, I'm upset about something out there, and there's a lot to be upset about. There's a lot that's wrong, no matter what our dominant beliefs are, but also to get curious about what's getting activated in me, because often we'll find it's a place that's tender. It's a place that's been wounded. And if it gets some attention, there still will be things wrong out there that need attention, but I'll be able to do it with less pain or less reactivity about it. So it's a practice that that we talk about, which, let's say in relationship, where we're working to speak for what's happening in us and to us, and not as much from it. Meaning, let's say you did something and I got really, really angry, and then I came at you with that. We could imagine that might not go well for you, and you'd be less open to hearing me. And it's not, I think anger is actually a wonderful piece of information, but how it gets used can matter, which is different than I started to notice I was having this big reaction and I spent some time with it, and then I could say, Sarah, I noticed I had a big reaction before, and I've taken some time with it. Can I tell you about it? So I'm actually telling you a little more about me than giving you feedback about the terrible thing you did that pissed me off. All right. So it's a very different way of communicating at our best. And because we're human and we're not perfect and won't be, some of those conversations are more difficult than others. But being able to get better at it is a good thing with the people we love, with the people we work with, right?
And is there anything else that you'd like to share?
Well, I'm interested in what drew you to want to create this vehicle, not just with me, but in general. That's what's driving that for you.
To create this podcast?
And the ones in general, because this is one of many, right?
Yeah. As an avenue of expression and connecting with people that I'm interested in talking with and sharing things that I'm interested in, the wider audience. And I love audio. I love listening to podcasts. Even before they became a big thing, I started this like 8 years ago, and it's just, I think it's a great way to learn and just to feel a connection in times of solitude.
It sounds like a great example of create what you want.
Yeah.
You wanted conversations with people, and you wanted to do that in a way that you thought they'd be useful to others.
Yeah.
Well, that's cool.
Yeah, it is cool. Thanks for asking.
Yeah. Thanks for doing it.
And if anyone wants to connect with you more, are there any ways to do that you would recommend?
Probably the best way is my email, because I don't really have a website, and probably my email. So I can make that known if that's useful.
Sure, if you want people to know that. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if that means I'll get one or two or I'll get a blast, but we'll see. So my email is RinaDubin, that's my name, @me.com.
Well, thank you for being here. I appreciate you, and I appreciate our connection.
Thank you. And thank you for the feedback you were giving me today. I appreciate it a lot.
Thank you for joining me today. And remember, change doesn't come from listening alone. I invite you to commit to taking one small or large courageous action after today's conversation. One step you can take, if you haven't already, is to sign up for my Sunday journal. It's a weekly newsletter filled with inspiration and reflections about the intersection between spiritual entrepreneurship and fulfilling your potential, to help you become the woman you truly are in every area of your life. You can subscribe at programs-sarahavansdover.com/journal. And if you found this podcast valuable, please share it with the women in your world. Also, I'd be very grateful if you'd leave a review. It helps others find resources like this, and I'd love to hear what's coming alive for you after listening today. Above all, keep going, and never forget the unique offerings you and your true self bring to the world. Until next time, I'm sending you my heartfelt support.